Hi, thanks for joining us. I'm Alison Spurl, and my partner Joe Chaput is here behind the camera. And we're going to talk to you today about cheese plates. I'm not really going to talk about large cheese platters, which at any regular time we would be making if we were having a party, especially given the beautiful weather we're having outside. I think in this time of COVID-19, we're all thinking about how can we see our friends and how can we entertain a little more carefully. So I thought it might be interesting to talk about doing individual cheese platters. So I have some plates set out here as if I might be having 4 friends over. I'm not actually, but as if we might be having 4 friends over. And how you might go about doing a cheese platter. I was sort of thinking about this as after dinner rather than before dinner, but same principle would apply if you were going to have cocktails on the patio and you might just want to serve a little cheese and charcuterie platter. We could have added some meats to this and some mustard, and the same thing would apply. I think what I wanted to talk about is how do you portion cheese? We work with cheese all day long, and so it kind of seems like second nature, and I realize sometimes that's a bit complicated for people and they're not always sure. First thing is you need a nice sharp knife. I've also got a wet cloth, which is going to come in handy for my knife. If you had a soft cheese knife, which is a blade that has some holes that help to release the cheese from the blade, that would be helpful. I, however, even though I am the cheese lady, do not have those kind of things at home. We have a very basic kitchen. We like just basic utensils. So I have chosen, I put these knives out both to kind of discuss them. This is a great knife and a beautiful chef's knife, which I would use for cooking normally, but it's quite heavy heeled, and so it's not really gonna go through the hard cheeses as well. It's gonna make them split a little bit because it's a thicker heel. So actually what I've chosen is this much simpler kind of wooden handled knife. It has a very thin blade. And when I cut the hard cheeses, it's not going to make them shatter as much, and the pieces will probably be a little nicer. So just rationale as to why I've chosen this. And what I chose today was 2 soft and 2 firm cheeses. And I think when you're making a cheese plate, of course you can have whatever you like. I have whatever I like all the time. But I think it's always nice to think about, well, who's coming? What would they like? And just a nice contrast. So you wouldn't really want to have 4 blue cheeses unless you were doing that on purpose to have like a blue cheese tasting. It would be kind of a funny cheese platter. And so I thought we'd maybe have 2 soft and 2 firm. I've chosen Manchego Selection 1969, which is a raw milk Manchego from Spain, from the north of Spain. I have this beautiful cheese, which is called La Marechal. And this is a Swiss mountain cheese, brushed with wild thyme and white wine on the outside. It's very kind of nutty and a little bit earthy. So a nice contrast to the sheep's milk of the Manchego, which is a little bit more fruity and will be sharper. And then I have a St. Albret. And to be honest, partly why I picked this, it's a delicious cheese, but partly why I picked this was, imagine how pretty this will portion for on our individual cheese platters. And I was thinking, well, this will cut very nicely into 6, and this will look really pretty. And so that's just an idea when you're choosing things. How am I going to cut this up for the plate? So that's kind of why I chose that. I was cheating. I had a lot of things to choose from, so I thought that would be a nice one. And then I have a beautiful piece of Brie de Meaux. And I chose this on purpose because I feel like this is one where it's a little bit harder to know how to cut this up and portion it nicely, so you're not giving somebody all the crust and it's not going to look yucky on the platter. So let's start. What will we start with? Well, let's start with the Brie de Meaux. I'll move these other guys out of the way a little bit. So this is a little bit more complicated. I'm holding it up because I think it'll be a little easier to see. And I'll mark it with my knife. So what you're going to do is cut kind of at an angle. So you can see you're going to have a nice piece, the first piece. And then the second piece I would do a little bit like that. And now you have a much more reasonable end piece that you can actually just cut straight. But it's quite, you don't want to just kind of lob it off because then you have this tip. So you just do it at a little bit of an angle, and then you can start to cut that way. So let's go ahead. And of course, it depends on how much you want to serve. We have some friends who come over who eat like birds. They're tiny little people and they eat like birds. So, if you knew that some of your friends were later eaters, you could just make a smaller plate for them. You never want people to feel pressure to eat more than they want, especially cheese. It's a rich thing. So I'm cutting that first piece, And I don't have gloves or anything on. I'm not really serving this to anybody today, so it's not really an issue. But if you were having friends over and you're concerned in this time where we're really wanting to be careful that we're not, sharing germs with each other, then you could certainly wear gloves to do this. So now I've taken those two first pieces off, and now you can see we've got sort of a more reasonable size end that we can put. Oops, I'm throwing things around now. And I might do two different styles of plate here, and we'll see which one we like better. Okay. And so quite often if I'm going to do an individual cheese platter, I would do the soft cheeses kind of on the opposite side of the platter. So if I was going to put the Brie de Meaux on this side of the plate, I would put the Saint Albret on the other corner, just to kind of separate them. Oops, that's very noisy, sorry. Should have done that before. So you can see how cute this is. Saint Albret is from the south of France. It's a mixed rind, so it has a bit of a washed rind, so a little more earthy taste, but not a super strong cheese. I think it's always great. It's nice to have one kind of strong one, push people a little bit out of their comfort zone. But if you, if you don't know your guests very well as well, probably at this time, if you're having people over to your house, you probably know them pretty well. But if you didn't, it's always nice to serve things you think people might really enjoy. Oops, I'm doing that backwards. Rather than scaring them too much with strange smelling cheeses. Okay, so I'm going to do these ones this way. I cut that a little bit big, so I'm going to sneak that little end off. That would be for me if I was on my own making platters in the kitchen. All right, so I'm going to make sure my knife is nice and clean now. And so with manchego, it's a great example. So you have a wedge. What do you do with it? People are sometimes concerned. It's like, well, it's from a wheel, it's a wedge. I don't know how to just cube it, and you don't really need to. You can just cut the crusts off here of the side. And then you could do two things. You could do a bigger, sort of wider wedge and just leave it as is. Let's do that for these three. Or you could do maybe two thinner pieces, just for a little variety of look on the plate. And we could go like this. All right. And when you see manchego often in Spain, here I'll show you the plate that I've done so far. So this is the well, I'm doing just two little assortments, just to give you an idea. You can do lots of things. These are just plates I often use for cheese plates at home. Manchego is often served in this shape if you were to have Spanish tapas and you were in Spain at another time when you could go to Spain. And it might have a triangle of quince paste on the top, which will bring me to the accompaniments in a minute. And then even though this is also a wedge, this is a kind of bigger, oops, I'm dropping bits of crust on my cheese plate. This is a bit of a bigger piece. So my suggestion would be to just kind of treat it like it was a flat piece. I'm going to take the very tip off because it's not going to look as pretty. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. So you could either just leave one sort of bigger piece like that. You could maybe cut it at a little angle so that you can make a little display on your plate. Let's do that with this guy. And maybe with this one, we'll just leave it as is and keep it really simple. That's kind of a wide piece, but let's see. There we go. So there's two different things you could do. So we have sort of soft cheeses balancing each other and the hard cheeses. And this one, because I've cut them both up, they're just a little interest to the plate. You know, the thing is, cheese is very white. So people often are like, oh, I'd like some color on the plate. But the thing is, milk is white, cheese is white, unless it has annatto added, or like this, it's brushed with cultures on the outside, or the rind is a different color. Really, the cheese is white. So now we kind of look at our plate and go, okay, well, how can we add some color? So I have a few options. Maybe I'll get rid of my messy board now. So dried fruit is always a good way. If we had grapes, you could add grapes. You always want to think about what you're going to be drinking. Maybe if this is after dinner rather than before dinner and you might be having red wine, grapes can be kind of questionable, but apricots will be great. So let's see if we can just add a few little apricots to these guys. The other thing that is always really nice is a preserve. This is fig and green walnut wine from the, Joe's reminding me I need to face the camera, that I need to, that's from the Preservatory. This is made out in Langley on their farm. So delicious. They make tons of really great preserves. I think this sells by far of all of their preserves about 5 to 1 for us, because figs are so great with cheese. And this one just has a little je ne sais quoi with the walnut wine, and it's really a nice texture. I find sometimes preserves can be quite stiff and sort of like have a lot of pectin in them, depending on what the fruit is. And so they're a little bit hard to serve. This has a really nice texture. Yeah, look at that. It's beautiful. And so you know you're going to be able to like just easily put a little dab of that on top of your cheese, and you're not going to have to be kind of hacking at it like it's a really solid thing. So on this one, let's just say we're going to put a little bit of preserve. And this will especially go with the soft cheeses, like with Brie de Meaux and the fig, and a little bit of toasted walnut bread from Terra Breads. You'd be very happy. So another thing, crackers, bread, people often are kind of wondering, you know, what's the right thing to have? And as far as I'm concerned, there is no right thing to have. French people very much believe in bread. I have a few young ladies recently working with us who are from France, and they're like, bread goes with cheese. English people think crackers go with cheese, and I think it should be whatever you like. I thought just for something different, these are from the Fine English Cheese Company. They're in the UK, and these are like a very heavy, almost like a wholemeal biscuit. If anybody remembers the old wholemeal biscuits that used to come in the Cars pack, which were my favorite. And they're a little tiny bit sweet. They just have a tiny bit of sugar in them. So they're kind of a fun thing if you were serving this after dinner. And the cheese has a little bit of richness. This has a little bit of sweetness. The fig is sweet. And so it would be really nice with a little red wine that you're having after dinner. So if you were going to serve this right on their plate, you could just pop it right on there like that. And you know the thing, I think lots of times people are quite concerned about having enough in the way of crackers and bread. But, you know, I think people eat so much less of that now than they used to. And I just think you don't need that much. I mean, like these cheeses, for example, I would probably just eat as is. I wouldn't really eat them on a cracker anyway. It's not necessary. So that's one way you could go about doing your cheese plates if you were having some friends over. So here's one option with all the accompaniments. I'm going to see if I can do that without my crackers going flying. And then here's another, oh, sorry, cheese moved. Cheese always sticks when you don't want it to, but never when you want it to. And then here would be another option. So just a way to think about it. Instead of doing a big platter where everybody's going to be using the same knives and sharing off the same plate, maybe do an individual plate. Just pass it around to your friends and you can enjoy some cheese that way. Thank you so much for joining Joe and I today. I'm Allison from Lazy Meat to Fromage. Have fun, enjoy some cheese today.